Hi everybody, and welcome to our second of our Speech Bites videos where I take 5 minutes to talk to you about one aspect of speech and language. In today's Speech Bites, we're going to think about Gestalt Language Processing, which is something that is gaining traction and a lot more people are becoming aware of, and it's something that is well worth knowing about. If you find this interesting, there is a longer webinar available on the Reach Out Early Years Stronger Practice Hub YouTube channel. So please do go and check that out. So as we know, the webinars and speech bites are all hosted by myself, Becky Frewin, a speech and language therapist, and the Reach Out Early Years Stronger Practice Hub, which is based in the east of England. So without further ado, let's think about echolalia. So echolalia takes two forms. Immediate echolalia, which is utterances that are repeated immediately or after only a very short delay. And then there is delayed echolalia. And these are utterances that are repeated after quite a long delay of hours, weeks, sometimes even months. Now, I don't believe in reinventing the wheel, so I have sought permission from an amazing speech and language pathologist in America called Mrs. Speechy P, who has given me permission to use her slides in these webinars. And here they are. So when we're thinking about echolalia in children, we are thinking about children repeating words or phrases immediately or after just that short delay. And that's an exact repetition of what the adult has said. So for example, do you want to play cars? Do you want to play cars? Some children are echolalic in a jargon way, which is where they're repeating sounds, words or phrases, and they are full of intonation, but we are just not able as adults to understand them. And it could sound like digga 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 dee, digga 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 da. This can sometimes be a typical vocal play for a child with typical speech and language development, but it can sometimes be scripting. Scripting is also referred to as delayed echolalia, and this is where a child will repeat a memorized phrase or a memorized word, and these are often related to emotional ties or a feeling. So, for example, a little one that I've worked with became very, very distressed when he came to my home clinic for the first time and kept asking to go up the stairs. And eventually we let him walk up the stairs and back down again. And he walked back into the therapy room and said, and 5 is 10. And that was a phrase from number blocks where there had been a problem. They couldn't make 5 and anything else make 10. Eventually, they made 5 and 5 make 10, and the problem was solved. So that was his gestalt or his phrase to say, I had a problem, but now it's all sorted. So I had a problem and I wanted to go upstairs, but you've sorted it out. So 5 and 5 makes 10. You may find with echolalic children that their language sounds very formal, just sounds a bit not as you would expect a small child to speak. So saying something like fancy seeing you here, which may be contextually correct, but just not sound like a child. Now, historically, all of this echolalia was described as meaningless, it had no communicative function, and we just kind of disregarded it. But what we are now seeing is that actually echolalia does have a role in Gestalt language acquisition. And what I want to draw your eyes to here is that all of the research that took place in the 1980s and then nothing until 2015. And the research that was initially done in the 80s by Dr. Anne Peters and Dr. Barry Prezant was published about 40 years ago and then largely forgotten until 2012 when a speech and language pathologist in America called Marge Blanc published a new book called Natural Language Acquisition. And this had 20 years or so of longitudinal research. But you had a generation of speech and language therapists, myself included, who qualified in the sort of late 80s to the early 2000s who had never heard of it. So what is Gestalt language processing? We now know that there are two ways to develop language. There's the analytic language development, which is the traditional form that we're all used to. A child learns a word, adds another word on, another word on, another word on, adds some grammar, and gets a fully formed sentence. So that's adding things together. With Gestalt language development, children process larger phrases or chunks first and deconstruct them down. Now, the end point is always original self-generated language, but they just get there in different ways. So how do you know if a child is primarily a Gestalt language processor? They use a lot of intonation. We call them intonation babies. They may speak in long scripts. If you give them a single word, they won't add things to them. And they also produce those unintelligible strings of language, that jargon. So again, that analytic language development is one word, two words, phrase, and a sentence, the schema that we're all very used to. Gestalt language development is taking a whole script and then mitigating these scripts or gestalts, so mixing and matching them. And then they take them down to single words, and then the grammar comes and we have self-directed sentences. So what do we mean by mixing and matching or mitigating these gestalts? So I like to think of like a flip book of words almost, where a child may say, I see a, and then you can flip it to car, ball, block, bear. So I had the little child called Annie who I met a few years ago. And here's a little quote from her report. So I talked to her mother about Gestalt language processing, and she said that she felt the description was accurate, and she gave me an example from something that had happened that morning. So often in the car, Annie's mother would say to her, let's listen to Moana. And then on Bluey that morning, the character Bingo has said, Daddy, I want to watch telly. And that morning, Annie combined those two phrases, taking Daddy, I want to, and listen to Moana, and formed Daddy, I want to listen to Moana. And that exactly shows you how these children mix and match the phrases that they have learned in whole, mix and match them into parts to create new, novel, functional language. So what can we do? If we have a child who we suspect is a Gestalt language processor, we listen. So echolalia always communicates something. So as we saw with the little lad who gave us 5 and 5 is 10, try and think, what could this child be telling you? You need to be a detective sometimes, and you won't always be able to work it out. And if you can't, that's fine. But always acknowledge the script with a head nod or smile or repeat what they've said, and then model useful new gestalts or scripts. So how do you know what gestalts to model? So think about how easily phrases can be broken down. Think about how useful they'll be. Do they serve a purpose in terms of communicating a child's wants, self-advocacy, asking for help? So I really like the gestalts. Let's get her. How about we? That so, or need some. And they can turn into phrases such as need some help, need some food, need some water. How about we get dressed? How about we go out? How about we find your toy? That's so funny, that's so silly, that's so sad, that's so exciting. If we think about bubbles, for example, which is something that we all use with our children, some useful gestalts around that could be let's blow some bubbles. I see the bubble popped. Big bubble, I want lots of bubbles, let's have more bubbles, it popped in your face. So what we're doing is we're flipping everything we knew about language development, and with these children, we are not pulling them back down to single words and simplifying everything, because if you give a child a single word and they're a child who deconstructs language to make language, then actually they've got nowhere to go if you only give them one word. So we're actually going to give these children phrases. And it can feel quite a scary thing to do because you're taking all of the original speech and language advice you've probably been given in the past and throwing caution to the wind and talking to the children in phrases. But I promise you it works. And if you go and have a look at my webinar, my full webinar on Gestalt language processing, then you will see some videos of little Annie and you'll see how she has progressed. I always like to finish on this quote: if they can't learn the way we teach the way they learn. If you want to find out more Check out the social media accounts. So they are speech and language therapists and early years teachers working with Gestalt language processors. And of course, you always have your early years evidence store where you can go and check out all of the latest evidence across all areas of the early years foundation stage. Join me again for another Speech Bites video in the near future, and I hope you found this useful.